What if the ideas we call good and evil are not eternal truths? What if they were created by human beings who were afraid of uncertainty? We often imagine morality as something permanent, like a law written into the universe. But Nietzsche asks us to stop and question that assumption. For thousands of years, people have treated morality almost like mathematics. Do this. Don't do that. This is good. That is evil. We assume there must be one correct moral system for everyone. Nietzsche attacks that confidence. Nietzsche's question is much more disturbing. What if philosophers were never completely objective? What if their philosophies revealed something about themselves? Their fears, their desires, their weaknesses, their need for order. This is where Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil begins. The book is not simply another theory about morality. It is an attack on the way we think about truth itself. Nietzsche wants to know, who created our beliefs? And why do we believe them? Most philosophy books try to lead you toward an answer. They begin with an idea, build an argument, and eventually give you a conclusion. Nietzsche does something very different. He does not want to give you another cage of rules. He wants to change the way you think. Beyond Good and Evil is made from 296 short sections. They don't behave like one smooth argument. Some agree with each other. Some seem to contradict each other. Others force you to look at the same idea from a completely different angle. One useful way to understand the structure is to imagine a hologram. You cannot understand it from one flat surface. You have to move around it. Look again. Change your position. And suddenly you see something that wasn't visible before. That is Nietzsche's style of thinking. Why does Nietzsche write this way? Because he believes reality itself is always changing. Life is not frozen. Everything moves. Everything grows, struggles, transforms, and eventually disappears. Trying to describe a changing world with rigid ideas is like taking a photograph of a river and claiming the photograph is the river. The picture may be clear, but the river is already somewhere else. Nietzsche wants philosophy to remember that. Nietzsche begins with a provocative question. What if truth is not something we can simply capture? What if the search for truth requires flexibility instead of certainty? For centuries, philosophers wanted to hold truth still. Nietzsche tells us to be more careful. The old philosopher often acts as if truth was something he could conquer. Define it, prove it, lock it inside a system. But Nietzsche thinks this attitude can become another form of blindness. This creates a frightening possibility. If there is no final answer that explains everything, what happens to us? What happens when the ground beneath our beliefs disappears? For Nietzsche, this is not a small intellectual problem. It is an existential crisis. When people discover that the universe may not contain a ready-made moral order, they can fall into despair. If nothing is guaranteed, why live? Why struggle? Why create? Why care? Nietzsche does not hide from these questions. But Nietzsche's answer is not to run away from the chaos. It is to become strong enough to face it. Instead of searching desperately for a rock in the river, learn how to swim. For Nietzsche, the strongest person is not the one who has escaped suffering. It is the person who can look directly at life with all its uncertainty, pain, and beauty, and still say yes. Not because life is perfect, but because it is life. Then Nietzsche turns his attention to the philosophers themselves, and this is where things become uncomfortable. He asks us to stop treating great thinkers as perfectly objective machines. Instead, he asks, what personal needs are hiding inside their philosophies? Nietzsche suggests that great philosophy may reveal more about its creator than the creator realizes. A philosopher may believe he has discovered a universal truth, but perhaps he has also revealed his own character. His personality becomes part of his philosophy. Think about philosophers such as Kant and Spinoza. They built enormous systems of thought to explain morality, God, reason, and reality. Nietzsche asks us to look beneath those systems. Maybe their ideas were not simply discoveries. Maybe they also reflected what they personally needed to believe. This leads to one of Nietzsche's most important ideas. A lie is dangerous. But absolute conviction can be even more dangerous. Why? Because a lie still knows that truth exists. Conviction can completely stop the search. Nietzsche's alternative is simple to describe, but difficult to practice. Keep testing your beliefs. Question yourself. Do not let your ideas become permanent walls, because the moment you become completely certain that you already possess the final answer, you may have stopped thinking. So, if we cannot simply accept the beliefs we inherited, what should we become? Nietzsche's answer is the free spirit. A free spirit is someone who can question even the beliefs that feel most important. They are willing to change their mind when they discover something new. They do not need certainty to feel safe. But freedom is not as easy as it sounds. It is easy to say, I think for myself. It is much harder to discover how many of our thoughts were given to us by other people. Our parents, our culture, our religion, our society. Sometimes the beliefs we call our own are simply beliefs we inherited. Nietzsche calls the opposite of the free spirit the herd. The herd wants safety. It wants familiar rules. It wants everyone to agree. The herd does not necessarily mean stupid people. It means people who are afraid to stand alone. Why do people follow the herd? Because belonging feels safe. When everyone around you believes the same thing, questioning it can feel dangerous. You may lose friends. You may lose approval. You may even lose your sense of identity. So sometimes people choose agreement instead of truth. Nietzsche gives us another useful way to understand morality. He describes 3 broad stages: the pre-moral stage, the moral stage, and the extra-moral stage. Each one judges human actions differently. In the pre-moral world, people mainly judged an action by what happened afterward. Did it help the group? Did it make the tribe stronger? Did it lead to survival? The intention behind the action was less important. Results mattered. Later, morality changed. People began to focus less on what an action produced and more on why someone did it. The intention became extremely important. A person could cause harm accidentally but still be considered good because their intention was considered pure. Nietzsche wants us to go one step further. He asks, what if even our conscious intentions are not completely under our control? What if there are deeper forces inside us shaping what we do? For Nietzsche, this is where the extra-moral perspective begins. Think of an iceberg. The conscious mind is only the small part above the water. Below it are instincts, habits, fears, desires, memories, and physical needs. We often judge ourselves by what we can see. Nietzsche tells us to look underneath. We like to believe that we always know why we do things. I did it because it was the right thing. I chose this because I wanted it. But Nietzsche asks whether these explanations sometimes come after the decision. Maybe the conscious mind is not always the driver. Maybe sometimes it is the storyteller. Imagine your mind as an ocean. Your conscious thoughts are only the waves on the surface. Deep below are currents you cannot easily see. Your biology, your past, your environment, your desires, your fears. These hidden forces can shape the direction of your life. Nietzsche then turns toward religion, especially the Judeo-Christian moral tradition. His question is not simply whether religion is true. His deeper question is, what kind of person does this morality create? And what happens to natural human desires when they are told to feel guilty? Nietzsche believes traditional morality often teaches people to distrust themselves. Control your desires. Suppress your pride. Avoid selfishness. Put others first. These teachings can create compassion, but Nietzsche asks what happens when self-denial becomes the highest goal. To understand Nietzsche's criticism, we need one important idea: resentment. Resentment begins when a person feels powerless to change their situation. The anger cannot move outward, so eventually it turns inward. Imagine someone who is constantly humiliated but cannot fight back. The desire for revenge does not disappear. It stays inside. It grows. And eventually, the person may begin looking at the world differently. Nietzsche's controversial argument is that resentment can change the meaning of values. If someone cannot possess strength, they may begin calling strength evil. If they cannot dominate, they may begin praising submission. If they cannot live freely, they may begin calling obedience a virtue. The values are turned upside down. Nietzsche calls this slave morality. The idea is that the powerless cannot defeat their opponents physically, so they fight on another battlefield, the battlefield of values. Instead of defeating strength with strength, they redefine strength as something shameful. This creates a powerful kind of control. You do not need to physically chain someone if you can make them feel guilty for being strong. You do not need a prison if a person carries the prison inside their own mind. For Nietzsche, guilt can become an invisible chain. And then, Nietzsche suddenly zooms out, far beyond human history. Imagine a distant star. On a tiny planet around that star, a strange species appears. Human beings. For a brief moment, these clever animals invent knowledge. They invent morality. They invent good and evil. And they imagine that all of this is incredibly important. But the universe does not seem to care. The star will eventually cool. The planet will disappear. Human beings will disappear. And all our arguments about good and evil may become nothing more than a tiny moment in an enormous universe. That thought is terrifying. But Nietzsche wants us to face it. Because only after we stop expecting the universe to give us meaning, can we ask what kind of meaning we are capable of creating ourselves. If the universe does not guarantee our values, then something enormous has happened. The old foundations begin to collapse. For centuries, people believed that morality had a higher source: God, nature, reason, something permanent. But what happens when we stop believing that? This is the deeper meaning behind Nietzsche's famous phrase, God is dead. He is not simply talking about a physical death. He is describing a cultural change. The old source of absolute meaning is losing its power over modern people. But Nietzsche sees a problem that many people miss. Destroying an old belief does not automatically create a new one. If you remove someone's meaning, you cannot simply leave them standing in the empty space. Something has to happen next. This is where nihilism appears. Nihilism is the feeling that nothing really matters. No purpose, no higher meaning, no final reason to struggle. Once people lose their old beliefs, they may discover that they never learned how to live without them. Imagine waking up and realizing that the universe does not have a personal plan for you. There is no cosmic voice telling you what career to choose, no universal script explaining why you suffered, no guarantee that everything will eventually make sense. That can feel like freedom, or it can feel like terror. But here is something important. Nietzsche is not celebrating nihilism. He sees nihilism as a disease. The collapse of old values can become dangerous if we are unable to create new ones. The question is not, is everything meaningless? The question is, what will we do now? There are two ways to respond to the collapse of meaning. One is to become bitter, to say, nothing matters, so nothing is worth doing. The other is to say, if meaning is not waiting for me, perhaps I must create it. That second response is much closer to Nietzsche. Nietzsche wants human beings to stop waiting for permission to live. Do not wait for the universe to tell you that your life is valuable. Do not wait for society to approve every choice. Do not wait for certainty before you begin. Life itself becomes the experiment. But how can we know whether we are really saying yes to life? Nietzsche offers one of the most disturbing thought experiments in philosophy. The idea is called eternal return, and it asks a brutally simple question. Would you choose your life again? Imagine that one night, when you are completely alone, a strange demon appears. It tells you something impossible. Every moment of your life will happen again, exactly as it happened. Not once, not twice, but endlessly. Every success, every mistake, every friendship, every heartbreak, every boring afternoon, every embarrassing moment, every moment you wish you could erase, you would have to experience all of it again. Forever. For many people, this sounds like hell. Imagine being forced to repeat your worst day forever. Imagine knowing that your greatest regret could never be changed. The thought is terrifying because we usually depend on the idea that tomorrow gives us another chance. We often survive suffering by telling ourselves, it will pass. One day, things will be better. At least it will be over. But eternal return removes that escape. It asks you to look at this life exactly as it is, not the imaginary, better life. This one. Now comes the real question. Could you look at the demon and say, yes, I would live this life again? Not because every moment was good, but because I accept the whole of it. The joy, the pain, the mistakes, the uncertainty. This does not mean enjoying every painful experience. It means refusing to hate your existence simply because it contains suffering. It means accepting that your life is a complete story, not a collection of perfect moments, a whole. Nietzsche's challenge is not, how can I avoid suffering? It is, can I become strong enough to transform suffering? Can pain become knowledge? Can failure become strength? Can difficulty become part of the person you become? This idea eventually connects to Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of one's fate. It does not mean pretending everything that happened was wonderful. It means refusing to waste your life wishing reality had been different. Your past cannot be rewritten, but your relationship with it can change. The eternal return, therefore, forces us back into the present. If this moment were going to happen again forever, would you live it differently? Would you pay more attention? Would you stop postponing everything that matters? For Nietzsche, this is a major change in how we think about existence. Instead of looking for another world to make this life meaningful, look at this world. Instead of waiting for an afterlife to justify your existence, ask whether you can justify your existence here. Now, after confronting these enormous questions, Nietzsche changes direction. He stops looking toward heaven. He starts looking at human history. Where did our moral ideas actually come from? How did humans decide what was good? Who benefited from those decisions? And what happened to the values we inherited? Now morality becomes something Nietzsche wants to investigate like a natural historian studying a species. Nietzsche makes a very important distinction. He separates good and evil from good and bad. These may sound like the same thing, but for Nietzsche, they come from very different ways of looking at life. In the system of good and evil, certain human qualities can become morally condemned. Strength can become evil. Pride can become evil. Ambition can become evil. The desire to stand above others can become evil. The question is no longer whether something works. It becomes whether it is morally permitted. Nietzsche's older distinction is different. Instead of asking whether something is morally sinful, it asks whether something is strong or weak. healthy or unhealthy, powerful or ineffective, excellent or mediocre. It is closer to judging the quality of life than judging someone's soul. Think about a knife. A sharp knife is good at being a knife. A dull knife is bad at being a knife. The dull knife is not evil. It simply does not perform its function well. Nietzsche applies a similar idea to human life. This is where Nietzsche becomes controversial. He does not want us to automatically treat strength as something bad. A strong person is not necessarily cruel. A confident person is not necessarily arrogant. And a person who wants to achieve something great is not automatically selfish. The real question is, what does that strength produce? Now we reach one of Nietzsche's most famous ideas, the will to power. The phrase sounds simple, but it is often misunderstood. It does not simply mean wanting to control everyone. It points towards something deeper, the drive to grow, overcome resistance, and become more capable. Imagine a musician learning a difficult piece. They struggle, they practice, they fail, they try again. Eventually, their ability grows. That is also a form of power. The person has overcome resistance through their own effort. The same thing happens when a scientist solves a difficult problem, or an artist creates something new, or a person learns to control a destructive habit. Power can mean becoming more capable of shaping your own life. It is not always about controlling other people. This is why resistance matters. If everything were easy, there would be little opportunity to develop strength. A mountain gives a climber something to overcome. A difficult question gives a thinker something to solve. A difficult life can force a person to discover abilities they never knew they had. Imagine a young prince who inherits a kingdom. He has money, an army, a throne. Everyone obeys him. He appears extremely powerful. But what if he has no ability to lead? The prince possesses power. But does he actually have the ability to use it? If other people manipulate him, if he cannot make good decisions, if he cannot overcome problems, then his position may be powerful, but he himself may not be. This is the difference between having authority and having real capability. This brings us to another important idea: efficacy. Efficacy means being able to produce a result. You want something. You face resistance. You find a way forward. Your ability becomes real because it works. But there is a serious problem. If the will to power means overcoming resistance, what happens when the resistance is another human being? This is where Nietzsche becomes dangerous to read carelessly, because the same concept can be interpreted in very different ways. Consider an extreme example. A torturer wants to completely control another person's resistance. The victim struggles. The torturer continues. The feeling of overcoming another person's will becomes the reward. This shows the darker side of power, and this creates a difficult question. If power is such an important part of human life, does Nietzsche give cruel people an excuse? Can a dictator say, "I am simply expressing my will to power"? Can an abuser use philosophy to defend what they do? Absolutely not. And this is why Nietzsche must be read carefully. Nietzsche's language about strength and power was later misused by political movements, especially by fascists who tried to connect his ideas with their own politics. But reducing Nietzsche to a political slogan misses much of his philosophy. He was deeply suspicious of mass movements, nationalism, and political herd behavior. Nietzsche does talk about cruelty, but his idea of philosophical cruelty is different. The philosopher must sometimes be cruel toward comforting ideas. They must be willing to destroy illusions. They must ask questions that people do not want to hear. They must look directly at uncomfortable truths. This brings Nietzsche to another distinction. The scholar collects knowledge. The scholar studies history. The scholar organizes facts. The scholar can become incredibly knowledgeable, and that is valuable. But Nietzsche thinks knowledge alone is not enough. Imagine a librarian standing inside a burning library. They carefully record the temperature of the flames. They classify the books. They document the damage, but they never try to stop the fire. Nietzsche's criticism is that scholarship can sometimes become like this. It observes, but it does not create. The philosopher Nietzsche imagines is different. The philosopher does not only ask, "What happened?" They ask, "What should happen next?" They take knowledge as raw material. Then they create. They question inherited values. They challenge old assumptions. And they have the courage to say, "Perhaps we need to think differently." Nietzsche believes that a truly great thinker needs something more than intelligence. They need what we might call intellectual cleanliness. That means being honest about your own motives, not pretending that your personal opinions are universal truth, not hiding your biases behind complicated words. This requires courage, because sometimes the hardest person to question is yourself. It is easy to criticize someone else's beliefs. It is much harder to ask, what if I am wrong? What if my certainty is only protecting me? Imagine discovering that one of your strongest beliefs exists mainly because it makes you feel safe. Would you still defend it? Would you investigate it? Or would you protect it because losing it would be painful? For Nietzsche, this is where real intellectual courage begins. Nietzsche also turns his criticism toward nationalism. He lived in a Europe where national pride was becoming extremely powerful. People were increasingly defining themselves by their country. But Nietzsche saw a danger in this. Why should being born on one side of a border automatically make you superior to someone born on the other side? You did not choose your birthplace. You did not earn your nationality. You simply inherited it. Nietzsche asks whether people sometimes use collective identity to feel powerful without developing their own individuality. The herd loves the word we. We won. We lost. We are better. They are worse. But Nietzsche wants the individual to ask, who am I when I remove the crowd? And now Nietzsche reaches one of the central questions of the final chapter. What is noble? For him, nobility is not simply about wealth. It is not about having a title. It is a quality of character. The noble person does not constantly ask, will everyone approve of me? They have an inner standard. They can stand alone. They can create. They can accept responsibility for their own existence. And they do not need the crowd to tell them who they are. Nietzsche calls this psychological separation the pathos of distance. It does not simply mean looking down on everyone. It means recognizing that people are different. Different abilities, different ambitions, different levels of discipline, different ways of living. Nietzsche's criticism of equality is one of the most controversial parts of his philosophy. He worries that treating everyone as identical can sometimes become a pressure to make everyone think and behave the same. His concern is not simply about legal equality. It is about the fear of human individuality disappearing. Nietzsche's criticism of equality is one of the most controversial parts of his philosophy. He worries that treating everyone as identical can sometimes become a pressure to make everyone think and behave the same. His concern is not simply about legal equality. It is about the fear of human individuality disappearing. Nietzsche is fascinated by exceptional people, artists, thinkers, creators, people who produce something that did not exist before. Someone like Beethoven, someone like Goethe. For Nietzsche, extraordinary individuals can give meaning to an otherwise chaotic human history. But the noble person is not simply powerful. They are also complex. They can contain opposing emotions, strength and vulnerability, logic and passion, discipline and creativity. They do not need to destroy every contradiction inside themselves. They learn to organize it. This connects to two important symbols in Nietzsche's philosophy, Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo represents order, clarity, structure. Dionysus represents chaos, passion, instinct, creation. Nietzsche does not simply want us to choose one. He wants us to understand both. Most people prefer order. Order makes life predictable. But life itself is not completely predictable. People change. Relationships change. Bodies change. Societies change. The future changes. Trying to control everything can become another form of fear. The free spirit does not need to destroy chaos. They learn to move through it, like a dancer moving through music, like a sailor moving with the waves, like an artist turning uncertainty into creation. The goal is not perfect control. It is mastery of yourself. And this may be the most important point. The highest form of power is not necessarily controlling other people. It can be controlling yourself, your fear, your impulses, your habits, your resentment, your need for approval. And now Nietzsche's philosophy turns toward you. Forget everyone else for a moment. Look at your own beliefs. Why do you believe what you believe? Did you discover these ideas yourself? Or did you inherit them? Nietzsche once gives us a devastating way to think about philosophy. What if our deepest beliefs are actually a kind of autobiography? What if your moral rules reveal your fears, your desires, your wounds, your ambitions, your need for safety? If someone could read the story hidden inside your beliefs, what would they discover about you? So here is the question Nietzsche leaves us with. Are you living according to values you have examined, or values you simply inherited? Are your choices coming from genuine strength, or fear of being rejected? Are you becoming more fully yourself, or becoming more like everyone around you? And if you had to live this exact life again, and again, forever, would you be able to look at it and say, yes? Not because life was perfect, but because you chose to live it, because you faced its uncertainty, because you created something from it, because you stopped waiting for someone else to give you permission to become yourself. That is the challenge of Nietzsche, not to believe everything he believed, but to question what you believe, again and again and again. Keep questioning everything.